Today, we're welcoming Merger Brad Cox to the podcast. Brad shares his journey from student to entrepreneur and how his frustration with exam preparation in Australia led to him creating Exam Insights. He discusses lessons learned from a failed initial idea, insight into the Australian tech scene, raising non-dilutive capital, and his vision for his EdTech startup. Enjoy the conversation. Hey, Brad. Really great to have you here on the podcast today. I'm excited to jump into everything that you're working on now because there's a lot of exciting stuff that you're doing. You're gaining momentum. You're making great progress with what you're working on. And I'm sure we're going to get into that in no time. But to kick things off, it might be interesting to turn back the clock and think back to sort of when you were just getting started. When you're getting started before you even knew that you were getting started on something, maybe. What did your life look like at that time? What were sort of your motivations, your wants? How did you sort of stumble into or purposefully, move into what you're doing now?
Cool. Well, thank you for having me. I'll take you back to basically, it'd be 1 year ago. I was studying for my final exams, 50% of my final grade, basically. My school and most schools in Queensland, in Australia, where I'm from, allocates an entire term, at least, just for their students to study it. So we had an awful lot of time to study for this exam because it's a big deal. 50% of your final grade, it's whether you get into the dream course or not. Very quickly, I found out, and as students, we kind of, if you're going to prepare for a test, go look at the past exam questions if there are ones. Because knowing the content only takes you so far. You also got to understand, hey, I'm going to get asked these questions in this context, in this format. I started attempting exam questions. We're very lucky for this final exam. We have a wealth of past papers, years of past papers, hundreds of questions. But very quickly, I found myself spending more time trying to find relevant exam questions than studying itself. And I found I wasn't alone. I have teachers spending hours trying to sort through PDF after PDF to make a worksheet, let's say, of the relevant questions for this topic. I guess it was a fresh perspective from me, just like, hey, why are we doing this? Let's add some tech into this and let's improve this experience.
And so, where did you sort of pick up the skills that are required to actually go out and solve something like this? Having the idea in the first place of saying like, this is a problem that I'm facing. Let me go out and solve it is amazing, and that's one thing. But how did you even get to the point where you could be like, all right, like I'm going to do it?
I think, and it started to dawn on me more now that I've progressed on this journey, and I'm having conversations with now principals and higher execs within schools. I think early on, everyone says, stresses product market fit and understanding your target customer. And I was very blessed in a sense that I was deep into that. I had a wealth of students that I could ask, get their thoughts on. I had a whole bunch of teachers that I could get thoughts on. And that's when I guess that really fast-tracked the validation of, hey, is there an actual problem here? At this point, I did not see any. Didn't really dawn on me the model, like a business model coming out of this. It was more just I identified a problem. Originally, it was just like, and it still is. Let's create a legacy project here. It was originally just going to be meant for my school because I didn't know how I'd spread the word, and I think people just did that for me. But you have validation, and then the other part is, so I'm a self-taught software dev. I took CS50, which is just an amazing course. Anyone who's done it can attest to that. So yeah, I had a validated idea, and then I also had somewhat of the skills to build at least a viable MVP, and yeah, it just went from there.
Say a bit more about CS50. You're talking about sort of the online Harvard core computer science. This is the place to get your feet wet, but it's also the place to kind of dive in. It's fairly intense. It's a pretty big commitment in terms of time, and it's kind of considered like the canonical sort of CS course, right? Can you say a little bit more about your experience with that?
100%. Yeah, it was incredible. David Malin, the lecturer, he articulates the knowledge and the content just incredibly well. You can spread it out from whether it is, I think, typically a semester. So what, 12, 13 weeks? I think it's maybe 10. I can't remember the exact weeks, but let's say you can only dedicate 4 hours a week or even 1 hour a week. You can spread that over and still learn a bunch. You're very well supported because you have the tutorials, you have the whole bunch of videos, you have an entire community of in ed discussions. I think it's a great, really well-structured course, as you'd expect from Harvard, but just for anyone who is kind of wanting to dip their toes, you start I think you start with Scratch and then you move to C. Don't take me back there. I hate pointers, and I'm very blessed I'd learned Python before that, and I've stuck with that as my go-to language. Then you have Python, a bit of JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and then Flask to tie it all together in your final project. Or it can be anything, but typically then a web app bringing all of that together.
Do you think that's still the best place to get started in terms of kind of understanding the logic of computer science? Or do you think it's better, having had that experience, there's a lot of new tools and ways for potential learners to get started, I guess, nowadays. Is that still the thing that you might recommend to folks, or how do you think about it?
I don't think, I follow a bunch of YouTubers who really dive deep into this, and I haven't looked at enough, but I think it's definitely one to tick off. But then you also don't want to go to this path where, I'm just going to do course after course after course and never actually get your hands dirty. And projects are where you do the most learning. I'll stand by that. The amount of, to look at where I came from CS50, and now I have learned, and I'm sure everyone who's not only just in code, but doing a project, you learn so much by actually just getting your hands dirty. Even if you don't see it has monetary potential, or the fact that you're going to learn from it should be worthwhile enough for you to sit down and start writing code or get your hands dirty and whatever that looks like.
Do you remember the first project that you made after, getting started with coding, that you maybe showed to at least one other person? What was it?
So I'm a avid mountain biker, and this was during COVID. So at the time, there were just bikes galore. They were pretty good deals. And, also you have cost of living, and hey, why can't we minimize the amount of money you spend on a bike and maximize what you're getting? So bang for buck, value for money. Every mountain bike kind of has the same specs, you have your suspension, you have your drivetrain, so gears, everything like that, your wheels. And if you look at those components, you can very quickly start to see, hey, we could use some ML here. This was before ML was a big buzzword, ML and AI. And we could find a predicted value or an industry value for that bike. And then we can compare that with the actual value of the bike and say, hey, this is good value. Or we believe this is good value. Now that was built, and we kind of pushed that out. Funnily enough, that was called Cycle Insights, and now we've evolved to Exam Insights. But that was going to be monetized by affiliate marketing, and that did not turn out the way we thought. It was a big learning experience, and it's where I was so sure for Exam Insights that we needed to validate very early. The issue was we were marketing to a bunch of mountain bikers, and they would see this number, and to them, we popped it out of thin air. And, trust is a big thing around money, and if we're definitively saying something, and it's very difficult to show how you got to that number, but we know, that was a big learning curve, and that's really why I can't stress enough validating very early on. You'll save yourself a lot of time if you're trying to build a project purely just to get users or monetary value. Of course, there's nothing wrong in doing that, because there's also then, like I just said before, the learning potential there. But you'll learn a lot very early on, and you'll thank yourself.
And so, that sounds like a great example of, just what you were saying. The best way to learn really quickly is just to get out there and work on these kinds of projects. Thinking back to the mistakes that you made with this mountain biking app, and how validation might have been one of the biggest mistakes, and how you sort of learned and did things differently with exam insights. What are some ways that people can like quickly validate ideas that they're drumming up, and how did you validate the idea with exam insights?
I'll do a quick little plug, I guess, because I'm currently in Build Space, an incredible 6-week kind of accelerator with thousands of people all over the world, and it's been. I'm really liking their formula, I guess. It's a week of figuring out the idea, a week of building a MVP, and his Faza is the main guy. He's the founder as well, and he is just very clear on, hey, even if you're trying to build a rocket to Mars, you can still find a 1 week MVP, and then let's just go ask if people want this. Now that's one way, and I think the biggest issue is everyone doesn't feel like they're ready whenever they build this MVP, and I felt, I definitely fell into that trap with Cycle Insights. So that's one way. It's been interesting. Then I'm part of an accelerator and hearing from a bunch of serial entrepreneurs, and they don't even touch a line of code before they've spoken to customers and validated that there's some viability. So how you go about that, it's very difficult, because you have my way was just talking to people in person, because I had, at least for Exam Insights, I had that those connections. For Cycle Insights, if I could go back and do that again, it would be there's a big community on Facebook, big communities in general, and just trying to not sell them anything, or not try and convert them to a customer, or purely just early on DM them, have a chat. They may think it's weird, but if you got to remember, they're just a human on the other side. And if you're so polite, you're just like, hey, I'd really love to know, I'm building this. Does this interest you? Try and provide them with the least amount of work they have to do. If it's like, does this interest you? It's a simple yes or no. Or do you have any thoughts? Yeah, whatever that looks like, whether it be a Facebook group, going out and talking in public. It's been really interesting looking at Build Space, and some people are literally just going out to the street and just asking random people, which some people can do that. I probably could not, unless, you know what, it may be worth it. I'd say, if just, those conversations on the street for those people may save you months of heartache if you find out you built this amazing product, but no one wants it. And then the other part is when we figured out that Cycle Insights, our big problem was trust, and trust around this magic number. It's not something that you suddenly figure out, and I'd invested so much time into it that there's then a month, 2 months where you are then talking to customers, trying to improve. It's never you just switch it off. You should continue to try until it doesn't make too much sense. And I think Exam Insights came around at the right time, so I didn't do that its full justice, because I was studying for the final exam and I had Cycle Insights, and it was kind of, which one do I pick? But the big benefit for me in Cycle Insights was, of course, a massive learning opportunity, but the infrastructure got carried over to Exam Insights. So we did save ourselves quite a few months in having to not start from scratch. And I don't think we would have we wouldn't have reached releasing our beta and then our final version within the same year for me to actually use as a student. So everything came into line, and feel very blessed for it to have played out how it had.
So what you said was really interesting, which was there's this just good idea around being easy to interface with. Give something that people could react to. And the other thing you said was really interesting is, there's really two schools of thought. There's build something and then put it in people's hands. And I imagine that in build space, a lot of people have never actually built anything. And it could be really, really easy to just spend your time talking about what you're going to build and not actually building. And to actually get people to put something out there, especially people who've never built anything before, could be really good, because it kind of like cuts through the, hey, like, let's just drop the crap and let's actually just make something. And then you make something, and if it's something that you're excited about, it doesn't even really matter if anybody else uses it. And the other school of thought is, hey, like, if you're actually trying to build a business, or you're trying to build something that, solves a problem for someone, you really want to actually talk to those people and understand them before you start to write a line of code or start to build anything. And I think that there's merits to both. It sounds like, in your case, with Exam Insights, understanding what people really wanted probably saves you time and actually helps you prioritize what to build. And, the Cycle Insights, had you spent maybe more time pre-building, you would have maybe sort of understood some of the challenges that you might face with what you inevitably built. The cool thing, though, of course, is like with Cycle Insights, it sounds like it was one of the first things that you built ever. So it's just kind of a great thing for you to have built it in the first place. And yeah, like, sure, it wasn't like necessarily, at least the way you built it, the most viable business or something like that, but you learned a lot just in the process of building something and putting it out there. But now it seems like you're saying, hey, I'm not just trying to build something and put it out there. I'm actually trying to build something that people use. So, it's not just about the experience of building and deploying something. It's actually, you're taking it a step further. You want to try and really make sure that you're kind of hitting the bullseye on building something that people actually want to use. Is that sort of a fair assessment?
Yeah, 100%. You couldn't have said it better. Yep.
Very cool. And, when we're talking about Exam Insights, what are some of the things that kind of surprised you about people using it early on?
So we were in a beta, and all of a sudden I found all these users from none of our beta schools. So it was, just trying to keep the cat in the bag was that was very interesting, that we couldn't even contain it to 2 schools. We had people already wanting to use it, and that's kind of when the light bulb moment of, okay, people really, really like this. It's been quite eye-opening. Just from a business point of view, you got to look at, so these students churn every year, but the educators don't. And we find the educators, of our user base, we have like 20%, which would be educators. And they seem to tell their students, and once you have them, it's just year on year. And, we sometimes just see an influx of a school because the educators somehow found us, and then boom, their entire 20 students from the class, and then that next class. And it's been interesting how it spread. And also just going onto, Facebook or LinkedIn and just seeing people send me messages saying, hey, this person that I've never met has given me a shout out in this physics teacher's page, or this student's page. It's the fact that, of course, we are free, but the fact that someone is then going out of their way to say, hey, this is really cool. This has saved me a lot of time. This is really changing how I study. So I want to share this with you.
It's really interesting because, some products teachers wouldn't necessarily like. For instance, products that help people kind of like cheat and not learn necessarily, right? They have sort of an aversion to those types of products. But a product that helps the student do better on tests, which at least in the United States, I'm curious if this is the case in Australia. In the United States, teachers are kind of assessed by how their students perform on standardized tests. So students doing really well on standardized tests, pretty good for the teachers. So I'm guessing that perhaps if teachers believe that what you're building can help kids improve on these important sort of tests, perhaps it will make them look better and maybe get raises or be able to keep their jobs or what have you. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's it also then, and I found out speaking to principals about their KPIs and their school reputation, and you have the teachers, but a big reflection on the school, and it's a very competitive, as I'm sure it is in the US, a very competitive with between schools and trying to have that top spot and the best performing school, and
for funding, right? For funding from the government.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. It's very interesting, and as you said, it's a very, there's this incentive for teachers as well.
Have you tried charging the schools for it yet?
That's what I'm. So it's school holidays right now, and they'll go back next week for term 3. And I had some chats prior to the holidays, and I'm itching to having some chats with principals, head of senior schools. It's but and this is what I figured out early on as well. It's very difficult to chat to a senior executive school. But if I can have, and this is what our outlook is, we have this organic B2C growth, and we use that as a lead generation funnel for the B2B targeting schools. But what that enables is conversations with school leaders, because all of a sudden I'm not this random person who made an exam preparation platform. I'm that, but I'm also, and we have 90% of your year 12 cohort who uses us and 20 of your teachers, because we have nothing to sell them just yet in terms of, we're working towards it, but it's more just, hey, I want to have a chat, understand where your pain points are, how you acquire, what's the sales process, everything, just a chat, because at the end of the day, it's, as I said before, and it's really been drilled into me, they're just another person. And if you're so polite, they'll want to help you. You're not expecting much from them. I word it in a way where, I completely understand if you can't do it. 15 minutes of your time, I'll work around your schedule.
At some point, I expect that's going to flip. And I think that people are going to be coming to you. And I think that you can potentially do that even sooner, have that flip happen. I think it's about sort of accelerating the growth within the school. But, the other thing that I've seen a lot of startups do successfully is have sort of niche podcasts. So you always see these founders and they kind of try and have a podcast where their goal is to just kind of like have cool VCs on their podcast, or have like founders who've raised, lots of rounds of funding and are super successful luminaries, that sort of thing. And, that's really nice, like for me to listen to, because I enjoy listening to what those founders have to say, less so the VCs. But, ultimately the people who seem to have a lot of success with podcasts are ones who focus on podcasts that are kind of like super boring to a tech person to listen to. Like, you should potentially consider having podcasts with superintendents of schools, or with with principals of schools, or with teachers, right? And make it like super interesting to them, but make it, by nature of it being super interesting to them and their colleagues, it will probably be super boring to anybody that you're friends with. And that's good, right? Because you're not making a podcast for your friends or your startup founder friends or anything, but you could make it for, for this group of people. You can make them feel like superheroes. And, we've seen at ODF, we've seen so many companies, not so many, but, about a half dozen, be extremely successful doing these sort of niche podcasts. And that could be something that's really beneficial here.
Okay, I have never considered that, but it sounds promising, and I can't see why. I think I'd really enjoy it as well. Thank you. I'm gonna look into that.
The other thing that's really interesting about this, by the way, is there's just so much that you can learn from having conversations with those people. And right now you're kind of saying, hey, like, I'll work around your schedule. I'll, do whatever I can to, kind of be there for you and work and do the work for you. That's great. Like, that makes sense. But you're kind of making it into an ask almost on their time, right? Like, can't you flip this and actually make it a give, an offer, right? Something that they would actually benefit from. And I think you can. I think you can do that through generating media that makes them look good, that makes them seem, very connected and very very thoughtful and very forward looking. But you also have this opportunity potentially to actually use that as a way to learn more about them and learn more about what makes them tick and how they think about making decisions, right? And you get to do that both during the recording. You also get to learn about it before and after, right? Because you're talking to them before the podcast starts and after the podcast ends and all of that. But yeah, I mean, like, and then also you always want to focus on, hey, how do we just make it so that more teachers are using this or more of the customer is using this? But yeah, I mean, like, it might be something worth considering.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, as I said before, yeah, you've ignited an interesting thought process that's going through my head right now.
Awesome. I think it might be interesting to kind of pivot for a second and maybe hear more about sort of like the community side of things. Obviously, listeners might get the idea that you're Australian by your accent, but I'm curious to hear more about sort of like what the tech scene is like in Australia, what the funding ecosystem is like, how you found sort of like your people. Do you live in a major city where it's easy to tap into these communities?
So I'm on the Gold Coast, which is an hour from Brisbane, which is the capital of Queensland. Sydney is definitely where the startup scene is, but Brisbane is starting to become a contender in that. And with my SaaS accelerator that I'm in, it's really opened my eyes to, had some amazing chats with angels, VCs, CVCs, a whole bunch of investors that if you wanted to do something in the Brisbane ecosystem, you'd want to chat to. I understand it's nowhere near what Sydney is, and then the people in Sydney say it's nowhere near what the US is. So, what can you do? But see, we're looking at it's been very opening because the accelerator is geared towards it's funded by a government VC to try and drive investments because they're finding that startups are just the high rate of startup failure and they want to do more. So they've incentivized VCs to invest money by match funding and a whole bunch of other things. But I'm looking at bootstrapping. So yeah, it hasn't resonated with me too much, but it's start having these chats now, whether it be a safe note for exam insights at some point or investment at some point or a future venture or whatever that be. I'm very thankful to be able to tap into this market. And I'm told there's a bit of hype around me just because, I've somewhat got this virality. And there's also a sense there that I don't have it's all hopes and dreams in the sense of, how difficult the journey ahead in terms of revenue generation is. So that's kind of doing me a favor. I'm told, it could be a 2-month sales process for a school, or could be 18 months or whatever. And that's definitely doing some favors. But yeah, as I said, nowhere near as big as the US, but I've never, we still have the big players at Atlassian, well, for us, the big players, Atlassian, Canva, and Safety Culture, a couple others that I'll kick myself later for not remembering, but for Australian standards, a good ecosystem.
Interesting. And I'm curious to learn more about some of the first sort of like non-dilutive funding that you received. A lot of people in the Merge community obviously have received grants. A lot are also looking to receive grants. Some might be in Australia, trying to figure out what kind of communities or what kind of grants are available to me. Tell me more about sort of, you mentioned your bootstrapping. No, you don't have anyone on your cap table yet. What kind of non-dilutive funding have you raised and from who?
So we somewhat non-dilutive. Well, it's a borderline funding. We for the being a young teen entrepreneur, there's quite a few competitions around Australian teen entrepreneur, different things around. Hey, I built this business or this social enterprise, I guess as well. So we've had a couple grand from different prizes there. Our first, what I'd call non-dilutive funding, was from Blackbird Ventures from their Protostars program. So this is their philanthropy leg of the VC. And for $1,000, it's an 8-week program, I think. I think I graduated from it, would be 1 or 2 months ago, but you have Thea. She's very passionate about what she does. She's incredible. And it's all about passion projects. So you don't need to be trying to build a business. You don't need to try and make this big difference. We had people who were wanting to create a deck of cards for, I think it was meeting each other, having prompts for meeting new people, or something geared towards driving conversations around mental health. Anything that's meaningful and that you're passionate about, Blackbird is willing to give $1,000, and then you have a call every Wednesday night, which you can then watch back if you can't make it, where we have some really interesting people, everything from how to get people to care to like I said, some really interesting speakers. So you have Blackbird. What else? You do have the incredible, if you're in the entrepreneurship startup space, you got StartMate. They run a really, really good student fellowship, which is running right now. That's around people just wanting to get into entrepreneurship. And then they, of course, run some accelerators, but that's not non-diluted funding. I think it's optional with funding at the end. What else? StartMate. It's not working. Brain's not working, but there's plenty to do, and I think Blackbird's definitely one to apply for.
Awesome. Well, Julian, any other questions for Brad before we wrap up?
Yeah, Brad. I'd really be curious to hear kind of how you think about, your place in the world, and sort of how, and like, this is kind of a thing that you started scratching your own itch. It sounds like you kind of want to take the bootstrap route, kind of control your own destiny. What do you think? Are you going to continue just sort of pull the thread and see where it goes? Is this sort of like, do you think it's going to be the core focus for like the next year, or like, how do you think about it? At least today.
Sure. Core focus for the next year, at least. I think so we work off the calendar year, the school calendar year, in terms of, when we become most relevant. As I was saying to Ari, when we first had a chat, it's been eye-opening seeing that we have such early on in the year, 400 signups every week. And to us, it was surprising. So my first port of call, and this is what I'm working on right now, is looking at having a first school contract, looking at revenue generation. So even if there's conversations around, because we are starting to become much more relevant, and we will become most relevant term 4, but we don't want to leave that too late. So it's we're in a big product dev, just a whole bunch of development going on, new features based on talking to users and understanding what they want, to then have discussions with schools and launching a freemium business model around that, geared towards schools, but also for individuals to pay for. And I'm very passionate, and kind of just looking at then in the future, very passionate to then expand this beyond just Queensland. There's immense scalability here in terms of the core problem is felt around standardized tests everywhere. At least from my experience in Australia, we can bring this out to other states. And I'm very passionate about philanthropy and just helping others. That's what's been drilled into me from a very young age. And I think there's a wonderful privilege that comes with a bit of money, let's say, even if a minute sum, and the difference that can do. So that's also another driving force. I love most of the time, as a founder would know, sometimes you're just confused why you're doing it, but most of the time, I love what I do. It's only when those tough decisions and those really stressful moments, but I love what I'm doing. And if I can find a way to fund that so I can continue doing it, and then also make a meaningful difference in the world, that's, for me, is a very good life.
Customers are the best source of funding. Brad, really great to have you on the podcast, and great to have you in the Merge community.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.